Welcome here Dražen Barbarić, who is head of political science department in University of Mostar, Mr. Mikulić, who is the head of Association of Students at University of Mostar, and together with the colleagues of Mr. Dražen Barbarić, professor here, we have students from Political Science University of Mostar who came to see the work of European Parliament and European administration, and most of the time European administration and some of my colleagues here are looking for civil society view on the issue. So we have a civil society representative, we have a student from Mostar here, from University of Mostar, we have professors, and we have the most important political institute that is dealing with this issue. And I will open to my guest first to start with Mr. David McAllister on the view from European Parliament on this issue. Mr. McAllister.
Okay, thank you, Željana, for giving me the floor and for inviting me, and I would like to welcome you all in the European Parliament. Dobrodošli, dobro jutro. My name is David McAllister, I'm from Germany, and I have the honor of chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee in the European Parliament, and I have 4 vice chairs, but everyone knows that my favorite vice chair is Željane Zovko, who often replaces me when I'm not available. I am not an expert on Bosnia and Herzegovina, but thanks to my friendship with Jelena, I know a lot about your country, and your country has been on the agenda of our Foreign Affairs Committee many, many times. I think the most spectacular event was in March, when we managed to have all 3 representatives of the BIH presidency attending the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Džeferović, Mr. Dodik, and Mr. Komšić, who was connected remotely from Sarajevo, as well as the Speaker of the House of Peoples, my friend Dragan Čović. We also had the High Representative, Mr. Christian Schmidt, in our committee, and the European Union's Ambassador, Mr. Johan Zappler. In the moment, we are working on the annual report on Bosnia and Herzegovina, steered by Rapporteur Paulo Rangel. This report will define Parliament's latest position on the country. The negotiations on the report are ongoing, and it should be voted in our committee in June. The developments, the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina have been extremely concerning. Many people, and I guess that Ms. Fenner will give us an update how the institutions here in Brussels see this, but this is the most tense situation since the end of the war in the 1990s. And across party lines, here we in the European Parliament, we call for an imperative that the current political crisis and blockage of state institutions is resolved without delays to ensure citizens' rights and to advance towards their aspirations for future EU membership. I strongly condemn all actions aimed at undermining the unity, the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the functioning of its institutions. And let me add that it goes without any kind of saying that any kind of historical revisionism, nationalistic, inflammatory rhetoric and acts for denial of glorification of war crimes and genocide are incompatible with European values and therefore simply unacceptable. In addition, the attempts to form, as we say, parastatal institutions by the Republika Srpska entity leadership clearly undermine state institutions, the legal order, the rule of law, the sovereignty of your country. This cannot be tolerated. Why am I saying all this, and why is this important for us in the European Union? Such actions and all attempts to stall decision-making and the EU-related countrywide reforms not only slow down Bosnia and Herzegovina's compliance with the EU accession criteria, but they also endanger access to the EU funding for the country's post-pandemic recovery, its green and digital transformation, and support for Bosnia and Herzegovina's participation in the EU's programs. Therefore, an immediate non-selective return to all state institutions is essential. The European Parliament continues to stand behind the efforts of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the international community towards de-escalation and constructive dialogue. Final point before I say something on the electoral law reform, I would like to reiterate our Parliament's call on the authorities to prioritise reforms ensuring democratic and institutional functionality based on the rule of law, based on fundamental rights, based on access to justice, and based on reconciliation in the context of the well-known 14 priorities. Now, dear Željana, on the electoral reform, which is high on your agenda, not on your agenda, but I know for many Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina. First of all, I would like to note the recent announcement that the elections are to be held on the 2nd of October this year. I just returned yesterday night from Lebanon, where the elections took place on Sunday. Extremely challenging environment and a lot of questions around the elections, but it was first of all a good message that the elections took place. It's always a good message when elections take place. And elections should take place on a regular basis, and that's why I do hope that citizens in your country will be able to exercise their fundamental rights on the 2nd of October, and I hope the necessary funding will be secured by the Council of Ministers in the respective time frame, allowing the elections to go ahead. At the same time, while it is positive that the elections have been announced, the much needed reform of the electoral law reform has not been successful. Not been successful despite concerted facilitation efforts not only by the European Union, but also by the United States over the current and past year. We regrettably continue to see an impasse and a lack of political will towards reaching a balanced agreement. I would like to recall the importance on advancing on these reforms as part of the country's path from the Dayton post-conflict setting towards the EU accession. Bosnia and Herzegovina's democratic transformation needs to be grounded in principles of equality and non-discrimination of all citizens and the constituent peoples as enshrined in the Constitution. So we as European Union have always argued it is vital to adopt balanced reforms that would eliminate all forms of inequality, discrimination and bias in the electoral process by ensuring accountability, political equality and the representation of all citizens, put in place conditions for competitive elections and to safeguard its integrity, transparency and efficiency. I would like to hear actually this morning also from you if you still see room to find this necessary agreement on the electoral law reform. I was always told that there were certain deadlines. First it was the end of last year, then it was January, then it was February, then it said until Easter. Now we're heading for Whitsun. If the elections take place on the 2nd of October, you might have to find an agreement sometime before the 2nd of October. A final point from my side, and I want to be very clear here. I know so much about your country, but thanks to Željana and to Dragan Čović and to other politicians who I've often spoken, I know something. Bosnia and Herzegovina can be described in very simple words. One country, two entities, three constituent peoples. Three constituent peoples. And I believe that all three constituent peoples need to find themselves represented in any kind of compromise and agreement. And of all three constituent peoples, the smallest one, the Croatian constituent people, deserve our special attention. And that's why we will continue working hard on finding an electoral law reform, and you can trust the EPP that we are fully aware of the situation on the ground. And you are in a very fortunate position because you have a voice in this European Parliament, and Željane Zovko will always make clear what's at stake in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'll keep it there, and now I'm interested in finding out this morning when we will actually find the breakthrough for the election law reform.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister, especially for your views on our constitution and about the concept of constituent peoples, which is not so rare now in European Parliament as it was, for example, 10 years or 20 years ago. And I ask now Mr. Andrej Kovačev, spokesperson of the European People's Party Group for Enlargement and Southeastern Neighborhood, to provide his speech.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Željana, David. Dobrodošli v Evropski parlament to all of you. This is also your house, and you are represented here very well by Željana, but also by all of us who are fighting for democracy, for fairness, for the enlargement of the European Union with all 6 Western Balkan countries, and especially the difficult situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is something which the EPP group is trying to facilitate as much as possible with all actors on the ground. As was mentioned before by David and by Željana, we went there, they come here, we talk to them, we talk many times to all of the stakeholders, the political leadership, that they need to be well accepted by all sides. Electoral reform, which will give the possibility for the Croats to be fairly represented in all institutions, not only in the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in all institutions in the House of Representatives in the country. This is fair, this is democratic, this is according also to the main principle of the country after Dayton: 1 country, 2 entities, and 3 constituent people. And the smallest one by number are the Croats, but they need to be fairly represented. Especially now, when we have the war of Putin against Ukraine, but this is against all of us, against the democracy on this planet, against the civilized development of our humankind, that we would like to have fair citizens representative in all democratic elected institutions all over the world. This is coming from the great idea of Schuman and Modé in our continent to have never again a war. We need to double and triple our efforts to find a solution. As was mentioned before, we tried, and I'm curious. I mean, I'm surprised every time, not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, when we talk to the leaders, they always told us this is so close now. That was I think in February when we went there, and they said, look, next week everything will be ready. We are so close now. We need only a bit of push, and if the European Union can do the last push, maybe yes, you will say something more that. We, so to say, somebody from outside give the last page and say this is now the agreement, but it's not happening. David mentioned this lack of political will, maybe some other calculations that for the elections this will be lost for a few percentage. Now we have the 2nd of October as an announced date. This do not prevent that is putting more efforts to find electoral reform. This is not the ideal case. I mean, we have the Venice Commission that normally elections reform should be not done 1 year or 6 months before the elections, but in this particular case we are talking about this electoral reform for years, and everybody agreed that this should be done. The Croats need to have the fair representation in all institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I hope very much that there will be this political will, and we as European Union, but with all institutions, Parliament, EES, Commission, High Representative, together with our friends from the United States, we can and we will continue to contribute for this fair solution for the reform of the electoral law. EU should be even more visible in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We should put even more efforts for promotion of the project funds, also under the IPA 3 possibility. We have invested, as you know, European Union has invested a lot over the last years, and we are not going to give up. Bosnia and Herzegovina is part of Europe, will become a full member of the European Union. We have our Croat friends, and Croatia is a member of the European Union. We hear very carefully everything what is coming from Croatia, from our Croatian friends. Thank you very much again, Željana, for your invitation, and I'm looking forward to hear more news and what we can do more for you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Andrei, and I would like to welcome also Carlo Ressler from our delegation, our head of delegation, and Ilicic Ladislav from ECR, who was recently with our colleagues, with his colleagues visiting Bosnia and Herzegovina from on the same issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kovačev. And now we'll have a view from executive power of European Union, from Ms. Elza Fenet, head of Southeast Europe and Western Balkans Division in European External Action Service. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, President McAllister, Zovko, honourable members of the Parliament, dear friends from civil society, professors and students. It's very nice to be with you this morning. I will just give a few words as seen from the External Action Service. As you know, we were very deeply involved in the elections and constitutional reform in tandem with the US partners as well. But maybe just to give a few words again also from the broader political perspective, because there is a deep political crisis in Bosnia and Herzegovina, as you know better than us. We have seen persistent blockages, we have seen persistent disputes, a lack of trust, a lack of dialogue. And the role of the institutions has been to try and offer this space to bring people together to actually overcome the political blockages. We have, as you know, a number of tools as well. The topic here is peace and stability. As you know, the EU is very much supporting peace and security in Bosnia and Herzegovina through the presence of EUFOR Althea. We will continue. We have increased the presence, as you know. We'll continue to work to make sure that the mission remains in country. We also have, as Mr. McAllister mentioned, a number of financial tools as well that we will continue to put to the service of the prosperity of BiH, as well as a number of political tools that we use to bring Bosnia and Herzegovina closer to its EU future, including progress on the 14 key priorities. And I'm sure David will say a few words about the work of the Commission in this respect. What we do at the political level, what the High Representative Mr. Borrell has tried to do, is to bring Bosnia and Herzegovina to the highest attention of the political leadership of the EU. As I said, Mrs. Zovko, Mr. McAllister have done this at the level of the European Parliament. Mr. Borrell has brought again the Western Balkans on the subject of the foreign ministers, including yesterday. They even organized a lunch with all of the foreign ministers from the Western Balkans. Even the EU heads of state and government discussed Bosnia and Herzegovina the last time in December. So there is a huge political attention given to the country. There's a recognition that the political crisis, the blockages have to be overcome. And at the level of the civil servants, we have tried everything we could to actually overcome some of these issues, in particular on the election reform. Now, what have we actually done? What are the parameters that we've used for this work? One is the Commission's opinion on what has to happen to bring Bosnia and Herzegovina closer to the EU. And as you know, one of them is linked to the election constitutional reform with the implementation of the ECTHR rulings. And this has been one of the pending elements since 2009. The discrimination against citizens on the basis of ethnicity and residence is contrary to EU values and standards and has to be removed. This will be one of the elements that we have to overcome. Now, as I said, it's one of the elements in the sense that we understand that this reform will have to go through Parliament, we'll need a 2/3 majority, and that there are a lot of other elements that also need to be addressed when we take on this reform. The other element has been the implementation of ODIHR and Greco recommendations in terms of how to actually conduct elections, making sure that we improve the transparency, the integrity of the election process, so that we don't have claims after the elections on what happened or didn't happen. This is really one of our core commitments also to rule of law and democratic values, is that the elections are taking place in line with international standards. What do we need to do? We need to try and, as I said, create the space to have trust and dialogue, because we have seen that the parties themselves since 2009 have not been able to actually overcome their differences and to come to an agreement on what could be this reform. So what we have done is that we've offered this space, and the discussions in the end address different elements, including the electoral model for the presidency, including the implementation of the Lubitsch ruling of the Constitutional Court, as well as the need to improve the functionality of the federal institutions by creating concrete anti-deadlock mechanism, if you want. As you know better than me, the Federation has worked with a caretaking government for the last 4 years, which is not sustainable, which is not good governance. Even if we know caretaking government can do some work, it is not in the long run in the interest of any of the citizens to have this situation. What we have tried to make sure is that all of the discussions were assessed against European standards. The Venice Commission was part of the discussions with us to make sure that any of the proposals could be commented and given an opinion against the benchmarks of the Venice Commission. And in the end, there was indeed a package that had the implementation of the ECTHR rulings, the improving the election process, a model for the presidency, and addressing federation functionality issues. This was, at the end of the day, the different parameters that the leaders themselves brought up to the table and saying this is how they think the election reform could take place. There was unprecedented progress, and I think that there was a feeling that after 9 months of multiple visits, long nights, long days, weekends, that we came actually very close. It wasn't, I think, just lip service, that there was indeed the perception that we could have had a deal, but at the end of the day, the political leaders were not able to make the final compromises that would have resulted in a deal. It includes the SDA, it includes the HCZ, it includes the people who were basically in the room at the end of the day to actually make the final step and the final compromise. Compromise, we know, is painful, compromise is difficult, but this is what it would have taken, that extra mile to actually come up with an agreement. The EU did not have a blueprint in its pocket. The EU did not come with ready-made solutions. The EU was a facilitator, with the US was a mediator. We were willing to help and put all of our best expertise, our best advice to the service of this process. We recognize that the issues will not go away. We are ready to continue to help. We will insist that the elections take place. As Mr. McAllister mentioned, this is really important that they happen. We need to make sure that there is the budget, that there are the people to actually organize the elections, and that at the end of the day we will be there again to really take it up again until it is addressed, until that we create that space for the political compromise necessary based on these different technical elements. Maybe just one last word to say that we know that this is one of the difficult elements. There are other elements that have to be addressed. At the end of the day, we do want Bosnia and Herzegovina to get candidate status, to take the next steps closer to its EU path. In the context of what's happening east of our continent, the integration of the Western Balkans in the EU is all the more urgent and important. This is the message that we're trying to pass to the leaders. Now is the time for political compromise. It's never been so important because of these wider challenges that we see affecting the whole security of the European continent, including Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sennis.
Thank you very much.
All right, now we'll have the sounds from and the voices from the ground, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, first from University, Professor Dražen Barbarić, from University of Mostar, and I appeal to my colleagues to be as precise and punctual with timing as our officials from EU institutions. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Milan. I will try definitely. Distinguished members of EU Parliament, officials of the EU, dear colleagues, I will give or try to give a brief sketch or interpretation of situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but with a specific geopolitical lens of relations between EU and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I was thinking this morning, should I start with one thesis, and I will after today's meeting that we had. I think, and it's my personal opinion, that at the moment EU has a really small reform potential within Bosnia and Herzegovina, unfortunately, and we saw it during the negotiation process of election law. But at the same time, European Union has the huge geopolitical potential within Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's some sort of paradox, and I'm not sure that all EU officials are aware of this inversion. What I mean by that? European Union, the position of European Union as some sort of equilibrium or neutral, non-biased moderator of our local political elite doesn't give results or efficiency or any kind of stability of our country, of our state. As the time passing, one part of our country, precisely the part of political representatives or political elite in Banja Luka, are closening the ties with one imperial and autocratic regime, with Russia. And at the same time, one part of political elite from Sarajevo has really good and really well-connected ties with the also autocratic or semi-autocratic regime in Turkey. So basically, as time leans, as time passing, the imperial embrace, metaphorically speaking, are just getting narrowing around the Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's why EU should put much more geopolitical effort in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not just as a neutral moderator, but as a geopolitical subject that will gain the mechanisms to influence in the reform process in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It would be a smart move to give Bosnia and Herzegovina candidate status, not some sort of acceleration of candidate status, but real candidate status with a really hard negotiation process in which EU will create the mechanisms and prerogatives, political and administrative, to influence on political dynamics and system in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But at the same time, it will increase definitely political stability and functioning of our state. Maybe even resolve on or reduce the tensions between three national communities. Otherwise, Bosnia and Herzegovina will remain a protectorate of international community, potential expositure of two autocratic imperial regimes, and in some sort a living ethnological museum for European students, tourists, international diplomats and journalists. In that case, EU will have to put much more efforts, money, political pressure to extract Bosnia and Herzegovina from that imperial and autocratic frame. That is basic of my interpretation. If the EU gave some sort of candidate status or tightening or institutionalizing relations with Bosnia and Herzegovina, that fact will diminish the fake overlapping consensus about EU path that we have in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have almost 100% at the level of political elites support toward Bosnia and Herzegovina European path. But really, you can or you cannot believe me, I am completely biased in that case. Croats as a people, as a national community, and their political representatives at this moment are only sincere political subject in Bosnia and Herzegovina that support 100% EU path of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I will use one anecdote. In one exotic island, a European anthropologist went for a research, and they discovered a specific ethnic dance of death, macabre. And from time to time, the different groups of European researchers went to that island and described the dance. When they started to learn the language of the local local population, they realize the dance as a structure of dance doesn't exist. But the local population that just took a performance for the external subjects, for the Europeans. Why? Because they knew that Europeans are expecting from them to dance an ethnic dance macaque. That is the precise same position of our part of our political lead toward European Union. They are dancing, but without any sort of structure. They will use European vocabulary. They will use a phrase of European values, but without any precise content in that phrases. That's why it's very important to diminish that fake consensus about the EU path of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And from that thesis, I will develop another one. From the perspective of Bosnian and Herzegovina citizen, especially if you are a Croat, especially, it is so hard to watch that kind of misuse of phrase European values or European principle in our political market or in our public discourse. I will just put a few examples. On our public television, called the Federal Television, in the evening prime time, information prime time, journalists refer to Croatian National Assembly as a informal gathering, all political representatives of Croatian parties. And they say, I will quote it, that Croatian National Assembly refer to our European values as a federalism and decentralization. But the journalists conclude, I quote it, those interpretations are anti-European. So decentralization and federalism on our public television are labeled as anti-European when the Croats are using that. When the leader of opposition, the biggest opposition party in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Nermin Nikšić, when he tried to describe his political position toward the principle of legitimate representation, he said, I will also quote, calling for a legitimate or illegitimate representation of the people and other similar initiatives cannot be called any name other than, I underline, fascism. Plus he added that he will never agree to that kind of, I also underline it, racist concept of legitimate representation. So basically, fascism and racism are labels for dissemination of political standards that the Croatian National Assembly is trying to put on political agenda. And that famous guy, practically the usurpator of Croatian position and member of presidency, always referred when he speak about our overarching constitutional principle, the principle of constituent people, he always called it as a Soviet model. So my question, and from my perspective, there are a lot of examples across the Europe of autonomous communities in Spain, Switzerland, the cantonal structure, this country, Belgium, Südtirol in Italy, Åland Islands in Finland. They are all having some sort of mechanisms for protecting and preserving group differentiated or collective rights. But when we put it in the context of Bosnia and Herzegovina, then we get such a label as a racism, as an apartheid, as an ethno-nationalism, as a different sort of pejorative concept. So my main point of view, I don't recognize the handwriting of the Soviet constitutional lawyers in Spain, in Switzerland, even the EU. EU itself is built on similar sort of mechanisms of subsidiarity, of federalism, of decentralization, some sort of power sharing. So why so problematic when we are defending and trying to put the same principle in the context of one multinational state that Bosnia and Herzegovina definitely is? And without those principles, I assure you that some EU member states would collapse even sooner than the Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in some point, that concept of media and public discourse becomes very frustrating when it's supported by international officials, even some of the EU officials. So when one thing is valuable in the context of the EU and the EU member state, when you translate it in Bosnia and Herzegovina, if you are creating in the public discourse from the position of Croat national community, then you will get a label of fascism, of racism, or even apartheid that we often get for the proposals of new election law. Thank you. I will not bother you with my thesis anymore.
Thank you, Professor Dobrich. We can go deeper in details during the debate, I'm sure. Now we'll have a view from, let's say, both university and from point of view of student and from civil society. From Mr. Martin Mikulic, President of Croat Student Political Science Forum. The floor is yours, Mr.
Thank you, Milan. Respected Chair Mr. McAllister, respected Mrs. Fennett, Mr. Kovacev, Mr. Ressler, all representatives of the European Union, dear fellow student colleagues, thank you all for taking your time for this important discussion, and of course special thanks to MEP Željana Zovko for organizing this important event. I will be very brief in some of my arguments, but if there is any question I can always broaden and specify and offer a more precise clarification. I will start with defining BIH. We must always bear in mind when we talk about BIH, what type of country and what type of society is BIH. And I will only briefly say that BIH is a divided society. And divided society are a serious matter. And in fact, many political scientists believe that BIH is the most deeply divided European society. And I will quote Professor Robert Hayden, that BIH is not the way it is divided because of Dayton, but rather Dayton is the way it is because of the very nature of BIH society. So the BIH divisions are not the product of Dayton or even the war in the 90s. BIH has been divided on ethno-religious lines for centuries. And I do not know of any functional divided society that is not based on power sharing mechanisms. So it is safe to conclude that BIH as divided society can only be viable, functional and sustainable as a power sharing democracy. I shall also refer to the, as he calls himself, a professional political scientist, who is Brendan O'Leary, possibly a renowned political scientist who is quite possibly the most trustworthy living authority on the matter of divided societies. Like Dražan also, O'Leary asserted that the EU is comprised of 27 constituent peoples, with many power-sharing mechanisms, veto, superqualified majorities, etc. Mr. Paolo Rangel also said something similar recently, that the EU is respecting specific identity of all member states. So we can safely conclude that constituency of peoples in BIH is basically just another name for power sharing. So if that is not discriminatory in the EU, or fascist, or racist, or apartheid in the EU, especially here in the heart of the EU, the Belgium, then it should not be treated as such in BIH. As O'Leary also noticed, there is no similar case in any European divided society as that of Željko Komšić in Bosnia and Herzegovina, who is supposedly and who is supposed to be a Croat representative, but he was elected almost purely by Bosniak voters. For example, we do not see the Flemish imposing representatives to the Walloons in Belgium. Such undemocratic hegemonistic practice of one group imposing representatives on other group is impossible in other multi-ethnic environments, such as in the heart of the European Union here in Belgium, because it is simply systematically impossible. And it is only fair we ensure such practice is also not possible in BIH. As for the elections in BIH, I shall note that not all elections are welcome. For example, what is the purpose of elections in North Korea? What was the purpose of elections in the ex-Yugoslavia if you had only one party, the Communist Party? So my note is that the elections only make sense if they are democratic. And it is my firm belief that the upcoming elections in BIH will not be democratic, just like the past couple of electoral cycles were not democratic. The reason for this is simple. Such elections in BiH would fundamentally be anti-Dayton, anti-democratic, and anti-peace elections. They would only serve as another round of political violence for a growing majority Bosniak hegemony that would further ignore Dayton, who is a precondition for peace, which would result in an increasingly difficult political crisis, but also in a serious security crisis. Directly facing the problem, and this is very important, directly facing the problem is always more useful than supporting the illusion of stability. Pro-Bosniak parties have been obstructing the electoral reform for far too long. That was more than evident during the Neum and Sarajevo negotiations, where Croat parties offered more than 10 proposals, most of which were given green light by the Venice Commission, whereas Bosniak parties offered only one proposal, which was effectively ignoring the essence of the BiH Constitutional Court Ljubic ruling. It is immensely important to note that the Croat proposals approved by the Venice Commission implement all decisions by the European Court of Human Rights as well as BiH Constitutional Court rulings. This means that implementing Croat proposals would eliminate all forms of discrimination for every BiH citizen, while also preserving the main principle of BiH Constitution, power sharing among three constituent peoples. So my question is, if the main goal of the electoral and constitutional reform, both by the EU and the US, was eliminating discrimination, why was that not enabled? And why was it not ensured that the Croat proposals are implemented, because it would eliminate all forms of discrimination, and I guess that was the whole point. And we have a clear framework, a clear guidelines for the reform set by International European Court of Human Rights, but also BiH Constitutional Court ruling. And as we already discussed in the previous meeting, the deal was not set because some political actors, pro-Bosnian parties, jumped out of that clear framework and clear guidelines with their political requests. And I believe that such political requests should not be allowed, and that these fundamental principles and the framework should be consistently respected. So my point is, the solutions are on the table. The remaining step is ensuring the political will on pro-Bosniak side to stop obstructing progress and to finally accept removing all discrimination in BiH. I shall also note that the rule of law is the cornerstone of the European Union. Unfortunately, in BiH, in practice, it has become merely an empty phrase. I shall remind everyone of the relevant article of the BiH Constitution, which clearly says decisions of the Constitutional Court shall be final and binding. It would be encouraging to see the EU officials calling for the rule of law to be consistently implemented. We cannot be picky or choosy with the rule of law. That would be a direct denial of the fundamental EU values. Therefore, I wish to underline that in defending the rule of law and the principle of non-discrimination, the European Union cannot have a selective approach if it wishes to remain credible. The EU must advocate full implementation of the rule of law, therefore advocating the implementation of not only the European Court of Human Rights rulings, but also the BiH Constitutional Court ruling in the Ljubic case. Hence, the Ljubic ruling must not be subordinated or ignored, but rather on the exact same level as other rulings. I repeat, we cannot be picky or choosy with the rule of law. I shall once more emphasize that the Dayton Peace Agreement must be fully respected, not only what we often hear from the international officials, not only in terms of sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is of course very important, but also in terms of key power-sharing settings who were a precondition for establishing peace in BiH. If there was not for these key power-sharing settings, we would never have peace in BiH. And breaching those power-sharing settings is basically provoking a new conflict. Everything else but respecting the Dayton Constitution would be endangering peace and stability not only in BiH but also in the entire region. So to conclude, the European Union has a historic opportunity to stand firmly by its values, to protect a peace agreement, and to show very clearly that the rule of law is non-negotiable. Those who block implementing the rule of law and violate the foundations of peace should not be rewarded with anti-Dayton elections for their undemocratic hegemonic pretensions. So this is the main problem of the failure of the negotiations and the conducting elections. Those who block progress, those who refuse to eliminate all forms of discrimination shall not be rewarded with another round of political violence and majority hegemony. So consistently implementing the rule of law and eradicating all forms of discrimination must be of paramount importance, and the EU should articulate that very clearly. This is the only way to ensure BiH has a truly democratic, prosperous and sustainable future. Therefore, I hope the EU will take urgent and necessary steps to help BiH achieve meaningful progress. A crucial first step would be ensuring a just and fair election law so all three constituent peoples, but also all BiH citizens, can truly express their democratic will at the upcoming elections. And at the end, I will also use this opportunity to condemn the Russian aggression on Ukraine, and I will make a parallel, although I really hate to connecting these two topics, but I think that we can all see what happens when we ignore the rule of law, the international law, and when we neglect the importance of peace. And I once more reiterate that Dayton Peace Agreement is a peace agreement. So we see in Ukraine what happens when we neglect the rule of law, the international law, and the importance of peace. So I think the same principles must be applied in Ukraine, but also in BiH, to preserve peace and to not negotiate with those who violate the international law, and those who block progress, and those who block improving BiH by removing all discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, especially for your view on rule of law as undisputable and absolute value, because it's the fundament of European Union. Mr. Zovko, would you like to sum up the discussion before I call our guests? Or
yeah, I would just like to say hello to and welcome our colleague also Sunčana Glavak, and I think we have two more speakers. Yeah, no, or maybe you will be you're the last one. Okay, so right from Digineer, is there any? Yeah.
I had no.
We have a representative from Digineer, and I would like to welcome you here and also to give you a floor.
Many thanks, many thanks to the organizer for the invitation, the political desk officer for Bosnia and Herzegovina Digineer. I'll just compliment on a couple of the points mentioned by Madam Fen from the EAS, and picking up on a couple of ideas brought by Professor Barbaric and Mr. Nikolic. We heard about the need for the EU to speak and to act geopolitically. And in fact, when we speak about Bosnia and Herzegovina, I think the most important is to remember and to think that this is a process which it's a country which has embarked in a transformative process to become ready to join the EU as a member state. And we do have the institutionalized process to that aim that you mentioned, and that's the process of EU integration. Bosnia and Herzegovina has applied for EU membership in 2016. The Commission has prepared an opinion in 2019 upon request of the Council, which the Council has well endorsed the same year, and which sets out the 14 key priorities that the Council need to fulfill to become ready to open EU accession negotiations. And in particular, in their opinion, the Commission has called on Bosnia and Herzegovina as key priority 1 to ensure that elections are conducted in line with European standards, thus implementing ODIHR and greater recommendations relevant for this Commission ones, ensuring transparency of political party financing, and holding municipal elections in Mostar. As you know, this last point is the only one so far which we have seen implemented. And as key priority for F, to ensure equality and non-discrimination of citizens, notably by addressing the Sejdić-Finci CPHR case law. The opinion concludes that Bosnia and Herzegovina needs to bring in line its constitutional framework with European standards and ensure the functionality of its institutions to be able to take over EU obligations. These views have been reflected in the policy which is set by the EU Council, which also last time in December 2021, in line with its previous position, has established that with reference to the institutional mechanisms which were set by the Dayton Peace Agreement, Bosnia and Herzegovina needs to undertake further constitutional and electoral reforms to ensure equality and non-discrimination of all citizens, notably by implementing the Sejdić-Finci case law of the European Court of Human Rights. The Council has underlined that no legislative and political steps should be taken which would make the implementation of Sejdić-Finci rulings and more challenging, or will further deepen these visions. And the Council has also reiterated its call for an inclusive process of limited constitutional and electoral reforms through genuine dialogue and in line with European standards to to eliminate all forms of inequality and discrimination in the electoral process. This is the framework that Ms. Fenech was mentioning before, which has guided the involvement of the EU in the talks on constitutional and electoral reforms over the course of the past 9 months, in which we have worked as Commission together with the EAS, together with the United States, and with the expertise of the Venice Commission to facilitate talks that might lead to a solution in line with EU values to all the legal requirements and political issues which are on the table. Now, unfortunately, and despite the sincere efforts, we have not seen a solution coming out of these talks, and our facilitation efforts, as Madam Eitrost has mentioned in March, at the end of the last talks, are now exhausted. This was a major disappointment and missed opportunities for the leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina to demonstrate that they really believe in the future of their country and that they are ready to take a political responsibility for the decisions which are required. It was also disappointing, let me say, to see that the part of the deal which concerns electoral standards, the integrity package of reforms to implement the recommendations of ODIHR and GRECO, which was brought to Parliament in the past month, was voted down just yesterday in the House of Peoples. This was meant to improve further the transparency and integrity of the electoral process, and it was a missed opportunity in this case as well. Now, there is no time anymore for constitutional and electoral reforms. Elections are coming up in October, it's May. We are ready to stand again on this discussion after the elections, once new legislative and executive authorities are in place at all levels in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As Commissioner Varelli has said on the 8th of March in this Parliament, free, fair and inclusive elections must take place in October as scheduled. The Ministry of Finance also needs to swiftly put the required budget at the disposal of the Central Electoral Commission to organize the electoral procedures. And while he was visiting Zagreb just a couple of weeks ago, on the 25th of April, the Commissioner reiterated that, as provided by the Constitution, elections will have to take place in October. It is therefore particularly important that all political parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina cooperate constructively to ensure that elections take place smoothly organized, regularly conducted, in October, in the date foreseen in line with the law. And let me also note that, again, the Commissioner, when he was in Zagreb, he stressed that everyone needs to participate and that boycotts or non-recognition of election results would only lead nowhere. Therefore, we look forward to see, right after the elections take place, that new legislative assemblies and executive authorities are smoothly set up at all levels of government, cantons and counties in the state. And we look forward to see a new Council of Ministers of Bosnia and Herzegovina taking office with the required parliamentary majority support, focusing on the concrete reforms to fulfill the 42 priorities. Let me go back to the main framework of relations between the EU and Bosnia. These reforms remain pending. They concern democracy and functionality, rule of law, fundamental rights, public administration reforms, and they can make a difference for the daily life of all citizens in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In particular, let me flag a couple of things of reforms which are pending in the field of the rule of law. We are waiting for the reform of the judiciary to restore the public trust in the institutions, and now again, regrettably, the urgent amendments to strengthen the integrity of the judiciary were voted down by some ruling parties in the House of Peoples, just yesterday, in fact. Second, the reform of the law on conflict of interest. This is another important point, also voted down in Parliament just yesterday. And the reform of the law on public procurement, which thankfully is still pending and which we hope that the Parliament of Bosnia and Herzegovina will take a positive position. These three pieces of law are part of a broader anti-corruption and rule of law agenda, and we hope that all political parties will be able to support it for the benefit of all the citizens in Bosnia and Herzegovina who, as I think you will tell us, look forward to a European future, to a prosperous future in their own country. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for another view from executive power of European Union. And maybe it would be best now to have a view from the student part. Or
maybe before we start, the student to have your part as well, Milan.
By my side.
Of course, and then we will have the broader discussion because we don't want to miss on you.
Yeah.
Just a kind reminder of what David McAllister was saying after the elections, that he just came back from Lebanon. Recently, I was in Lebanon when they have been. It was not recent, I mean, it was 4 years ago. We went there as an EPP group in order to try to help negotiations of this electoral law that they have that they had issue with. So they had the elections, and I was quite interested to find out how these elections went. And this is a power-sharing society. And this morning I was watching Boris Johnson on the, visiting Belfast, trying to break the deal with this power-sharing, also Good Friday Agreement, the issues that we are facing in Northern Ireland as a European Union. So in order to compare these situations, I would like External Action Service to pay more focus on what is going on this, on our borders with third countries such as the UK, and also in southern neighborhood in Lebanon, when this special fine balance between three communities has broken the deal in order to preserve this community and in order to fight state capture by forces such as Hezbollah, or that can really cause security issues for us. So power sharing is really good in some parts of the world, and what Raja Barbaric has just said, it's power sharing issue that should be taken into account when we are trying to fight these imperialistic forces from Turkey and from Russia that are presenting themselves in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Sometimes I'm thinking whether it's good or not to promise candidate status, but maybe that's the only way out in order to really send the message to this Russian and Turkish influence, and to say, yeah, this country is on a European path, and European Union has to get really engaged there and not to keep them as some sort of negotiations for some deals that are being made in the region, because only Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo are being treated as special cases and American babies. Right, thank you.
And influenced by no-European actors, highly influenced by them. Thank you, and I'll try to be as concrete as possible, because my previous speakers described the legal side of our very complex story, its close relations to the basis of the European Union with the rule of law, and the wider dimension, including security one and geopolitical one. I'll try to tell something about the daily politics in the next few months, what will happen, what we can expect. In the previous meeting I'll try to underline it, but despite we had, you said, significant progress in last, let's say, 6 months or even 9 months, negotiators came like this to the agreement, but it failed. And now the results of that progress is zero. And it's a very dangerous situation. For a few months, we can go in negative phase. The situation can be worse than 9 months before the start of negotiations. Because what will happen, what can happen, and probably it will. One side in these negotiations, which means, let's say, Bosniak or pro-Bosnian or whatever the brand is, that side, let's say, parties with headquarters in Sarajevo, can organize themselves to elect 4th time, I'll repeat, 4th time since 2006, Mr. Komšić for Croat member of presidency with, let's say, about 0% of Croat legitimacy, about 99% of his votes are from Bosniak. From areas of Bosnia and Herzegovina with high Bosniak majority, and even more serious, 3rd time the situation which could be repeated is that parties with minor support of Croats in federation could form entire executive power of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina with one of 2 entities. To remind you, the last case was in between 2011 to 2015, when President of Federation, 2 vice presidents, an entire government of Federation, very powerful by its competences and budgetary control, they were elected by the parties which enjoyed less than 20% of Croat voters in federation. And out of that government and governmental majority were the parties which received more than 80% of Croat votes in federation entity. Which means that not only the principle of legitimate representation, but of democracy was whipped away completely. It's ridiculization of constitution, and somehow, because of 20 years of propaganda, I would say more than 20 years, somehow it became normal that any insistence on federalist feature of Bosnia and Herzegovina constitution is labeled as you said, not only racistic and fascistic, but also separatistic, and negative effects of unitarism as the opposing force to separatism is neglected. To be clear, separatism do exist in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it's very dangerous. But also, unitarism is only the opposite side of our scene, and only appropriate way to avoid future polarization and destabilization of our country is federalism. Not because I love this or anybody, but because our constitution is federalist. And just to repeat again, in next few months we can expect another humiliation of principles of our constitution, which can result in constitutional crisis. If again federal government will be composed by the parties with the minor or not existing political support among the Croats, then we will have the crisis between cantonal level of power and federal level, and in that case only Mr. Dodik can be very satisfied and say my entity is the only functional part of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I appreciate that European Union negotiators, especially Ms. Seinhorst, took part in negotiations. I met her in January this year, and she really tried to make a great job.
Indeed.
Excuse me?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, indeed. It was very, very good process and intensive one. But I think it started too late. I am afraid it started too late. In the middle of 2021, it was already too late. And now we will go on elections with all the rules, with all the risks I mentioned, so we can expect the crisis. I only can appeal on all the levels of authorities within European Union, executive and parliament and everybody, literally, to focus the attention on indirect phase of the elections, because on presidential election, unitarist forces can repeat the case Komšić for fourth time. We cannot prevent them. But I think that focused attention of European Union on election of delegates from cantonal assemblies in Federal House of Peoples could be crucial, could be essential. Focused attention of European Union could discourage the same manipulation which happened in 2010, 2011, when that government with no Croat support at the federal level was formed. I am appeal of all of you and all your colleagues to do that, to try to prevent the next crisis, systemic crisis in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That was my attempt to focus this debate from wider levels to what we can expect in next few months, which will be pretty bad in international scene, I am afraid, how it goes with all the wars and crises around us. And now I have the honor to ask our representative of our students to provide their voice, Mrs. Darija Knežević.
Thank you. Dear members of the European Parliament, dear Ms. Zovko, who is the host of this event and of our entire visit, first and foremost, I would like to thank you on behalf of all students from the University of Mostar, as well on behalf of all young people from Bosnia and Herzegovina, for having us here today and for listening to the message that we would like to deliver. All the students that you see here today live in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also all of us are citizens of the European Union. Since we are all of the Croatian nationality, we have access to the broad range of political rights that the European Union grants us. However, we are sadly and continuously denied one of the basic political rights, and that is to elect the people to represent us legitimately in our own country. And I would like to highlight this word once again, legitimately. Croatians in BiH are the only nation in the entire Europe that are denied this right. 2 decades-long tradition of political violence against Croatians have pushed BiH into the deepest political crisis it has ever been. And the only way out of this crisis, and the first step in general, is to reform the election law. We are sadly aware of the fact that BiH cannot do much on its own without the intervention of the international community and the EU specifically. Therefore, I would use this opportunity to call to account all actors that may contribute to the reform. Majority of the modern BiH election cycles were used as an instrument of a hegemony conducted by majorities nation. This fact contradicts principles of the rule of law and non-discrimination, which the European Union must respect if it wants to keep its credibility and trust of people in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I strongly stand by the opinion that the European Union should not support anti-Dayton and discriminatory elections. Unfortunately, there is a rising trend in Euroscepticism among young people in BiH, and if we are really determined to our Euro-Atlantic path, we have to act fast and strong to change that fact and bring back that part of credibility and trust that was lost. Supporting the upcoming election is definitely not doing much in favor of the mentioned goal. By choosing the status quo, BiH is only pushing itself deeper into the crisis and into the destabilized and conflict-oriented context, which is starting to represent a big threat to our nation's peace. Dayton is basis of peace and stability, which is why every political action that is not made in the spirit of Dayton is a direct threat to our hard-earned peace. Currently, the majority nation's perspective on the election process, along with their power to form the election process in a way they wish, which allows them to continue with the political hegemony and to block any reform of the law in question, is the biggest destabilizer to Dayton-based BiH. It is clear that the election law must be reformed, and in this lies the biggest opportunity for the European Union to demonstrate its true and authentic dedication to the principles of the rule of law, anti-discriminatory policies, peace agreements, and to show and demonstrate its will to support and politically help minor nations. People of Bosnia and Herzegovina are constantly aiming for European values, but our internal political climate is constantly putting it out of our reach. Until our political leaders create an internal consensus about crucial mechanisms of a functioning state, there is not much we can do to become a part of this magnificent community. I want our national representatives to be sitting here one day in this exact same building, discussing our interests and working on creating a better environment for all of us. But unless some serious political decisions are made, with the help and encouragement of the European Union, sadly this will stay just a dream. I'm calling you to action right here and right now, in the name of all young people who are using me as their voice today. We strongly believe in your power, and we are asking you to use it along with your influence to help to put to an end the Bosnian crisis and allow Croatians in BiH to experience the real democracy for the first time. There is only one way for this to finally happen, and that is once again to reform and change the election law with the main focus on Croatian political rights. There is an old Jewish saying, if you're not moving forward, you're going backward. And I will use this saying in the context we're speaking in today. Dear European Union, if you're not helping us successfully initiate and implement the reform of the election law, you're pushing us deeper into the crisis. We're experiencing a major drawback on our journey to the European Union, which is why I believe that it is now or never. This is that when the European Union has to establish its credibility and show its seriousness when it comes to BiH. If you truly want to help us move forward, do not support actions that are pulling us backwards. Elections are planned for October, and if they take place by the exact same rules as they did by now, by the rules that have been blocking the establishment of a functional political authority for the last 20+ years, it will be clear that not many actors truly care about BiH as they claim to. Do not allow yourself to let Croatians in BiH down. I like to say that I'm very lucky for being born and raised in Mostar City, and the European Union witnessed a historical win for Mostar City almost 2 years ago, when the Mostar Agreement was signed and the local elections were finally held after 12 long years. For 12 long years, democracy moved out of my hometown. Our city council was completely blocked. We had no one to represent us, no one to work in our favor, and that is exactly how Croatians feel today. However, Mostar Agreement wasn't fully implemented, since the local elections were the only point made in the agreement. The agreement also predicted the reform of the election law, which sadly hasn't happened. It apparently wasn't not taken as seriously as it was represented. Due to this fact, part of credibility of the main local political actors as well as international actors was lost, and there is not much space left for the main actors to take action and risk losing credibility once again. I believe that the lowest point was already reached, and the only way from now on is up and forward towards the European Union. I'm hoping that one day I, or anyone from Bosnia and Herzegovina, will be standing in front of you and thanking you for helping with the stabilization of a Bosnian political climate and the consolidation of democracy, mostly manifested by allowing Croatians to elect legitimate representatives. I was very proud of the European Union and my town, Mostar, almost 2 years ago, and I'm hoping to feel the same level of proudness when it comes to my country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the country of 3 constituent people. Thank you.
And you should be invited as an expert to the next European Council or Foreign Affairs Ministers' Council. That was a precise presentation. I really enjoyed that. Well done.
Thank you.
And Mr. McAllister has just...
DG Nia, invite her.
No, it's serious.
That was excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That was excellent. You brought it right to the point. Sorry.
No, but exactly.
For
But, you
future.
have said, thank you very much, and you moved me to the tears. And this is the exact reason why I'm trying to explain what I'm trying to explain, but you had the perfect example. I'm so proud, and I'm now assured that we are in good hands.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So please, External Action Service, DG Nia, you have somebody you can invite as an expert. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. And I think we can open the floor for all our guests, including other members of European Parliament, if they can contribute to our debate. Mr. Lipčić, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thank you, colleagues from EPP, for organizing this meeting. And when we speak about the dialogue between all nations in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is really important to have this dialogue and to explain and even to make pressure to achieve some results. Anyway, we have to be aware that there is a possibility that that is not enough. We can say that we were that close to the results in negotiations, but maybe somebody made us think that we were that close, and maybe we were that close, you know. So it means that the result is 0, as you said. That's why I think that the statement of the Commission at the beginning that the elections should occur anyway didn't help us in these negotiations. This statement decreased our tools of European Union, our pressure to Bosniak side to change. And this statement was very welcomed by Mr. Komšić and his supporters, because they realized that elections in the way that they liked them to happen really could happen, so they don't need to change anything. So that is what we have to think about. And one more thing about criteria and parameters you mentioned. I completely agree with you concerning the discrimination and that there should be no discrimination. But it is more than obvious that there are different explanations of this discrimination. So we have to be clear in what are, so to say, bones. What is the construction of Bosnia and Herzegovina what is the skeleton which can carry this state forward. And this is the fact Mr. McAllister mentioned, that this is historically multi-ethnic state. And that we have to make just relation among nations there. And then we can fulfill it with all different rights and tools. But without that, we shall always end, as Mr. Mikulic said, you know, in a path that somebody will call us, you know, fascist and Nazist and everything else. So we have to be very clear and very simple in some basic things, and that is that Bosnia and Herzegovina is historically multi-ethnic state, and then everybody, and what you said, that the end of the war was based on the Dayton Agreement, which recognized this fact. So we have to be very simple and very clear in basic things, and then on these basic things we can build up everything else. If we miss the level of importance of different criteria, then we can mess everything up. So I hope that we shall make this from the European side, we shall make this pressure and explain and force people from all stakeholders in Bosnia and Herzegovina to accept that, because we shall really have a problem. Because I think that's my personal expectation, that Mr. Dodik is hardly waiting these elections, you know, and then he can make mess, and Mr. Putin will use everything what he can do to move focus from Ukraine to some other unstable position in Europe, and that could be Bosnia and Herzegovina. It will go on the heads of all people there, and that is not fair. And we have to prevent that, and we have to, as people said that before, we have to make pressure to them to realize basic things about Bosnia and Herzegovina and to build a just relation among nations there. Thank you.
Thank you. Other contributions or questions? Yeah.
If I can only add, from a purely pragmatic position, BiH cannot survive with only two groups. If you have two unitary entities, the RS and the FBIH, then the BiH will not collapse tomorrow or in a week, but in 1 hour. And Croats are, as MEP Zovko also often says, the glue that keeps BiH together. So if the fundamental rights of Croats are not respected, and this is not only because it is Croats and I'm a Croat, the same principle would be applied in any divided society with three groups. So if you have the least numerous group deny their fundamental rights, then we can only expect a Cyprus-like scenario, where the most numerous groups will refuse to share power, and we will have we will have physical division, and we will have the situation as same in Cyprus. And I believe, especially in today's moment, with the Russian aggression on Ukraine, as as it was already noted, it will only further complicate the issue, not only in BiH, but only in entire Europe. So I think it's high time that the election law is finally amended.
Yeah, because I have to leave in a few minutes, I just wanted to make one point. Listening carefully to what you said, Professor said, Zovko said, why is Bosnia and Herzegovina always treated differently by the European and the international community than other countries? This is a question which I have often asked myself, and I'm still trying to find an answer. I'm often confronted here in the European Parliament by colleagues from the left. Oh, we should stop thinking in terms of constituent peoples in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's more, the new concept is civic Bosnia and Herzegovina. There's just one Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we should stop thinking and talking about constituent people and so on. You know the debate, you know also how controversial this is. And sometimes I'm quite puzzled, because this argumentation would only apply to Bosnia and Herzegovina. while I was sitting here, I just looked up the English translation of the Belgian Constitution. Belgian Constitution says, Article 1, Belgium is a federal state composed of communities and regions. In Article 2 it says, Belgium compromises three communities, the Flemish community, the French community, and the German-speaking community. I have never been told in this parliament, oh, in Belgium we should stop thinking in terms of Flemish, Walloons, and German speakers. That is a concept of the past. We should look into the future. And then there's civic Belgium. We're just all only Belgians. Well, no. People in this country are Belgians on the one hand, but they also think in terms of either being Flemish-speaking, Walloon-speaking, or German-speaking. And that is a concept which applies to many countries. You've referred to it. But why this doesn't apply to Bosnia and Herzegovina for some politicians, I simply don't understand. And the other point is that indeed, the specialty here is three constituent people and two entities, but it is indeed the smallest of the three groups, the Croats, who actually keep this country together to a certain degree. Because if there are no Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina, well then you have two people, two entities, and then the split might be much easier. So that's why I don't understand why some people simply have difficulties understanding something which I, as a German, after a few weeks and months, actually understood. I want to make a final point. I've often observed also the debates in among national leaders in the European Union. Prime Minister Plenković is the one who always puts this on the agenda of the European Union. But what we need is a few more member states, apart from Croatia. We say, look, this is not about Croats and Croatia. This is the broader picture. How can we bring Bosnia and Herzegovina into a stable future? And I think it's legitimate that Croats, as one of the three constituent peoples, should have their own rights to decide who they represent, who represent them. I mean, other countries have exactly this system. Why does this not apply to Bosnia and Herzegovina? That's why I just wanted to take the floor for a moment and thank you for this initiative. And we need to keep it high on the agenda. But I'm not sure we still have time until the 2nd of October.
Yeah. Excuse me, before you leave, is there any chance, by your estimation, to have some other member state to join Croatia in that position?
Well, I think that I've often observed Prime Minister Plenković and also Foreign Minister Radman, if they have time, 10, 15, 20 minutes, to get the ear of European leaders, most of them get the message. I've been a personal witness how Andrei likes to take out his paper, then he draws a map, and then he starts. And if somebody has 10, 15 minutes time, they get it. But you need, of course, 10, 15 minutes time to actually convince people. But we here in Brussels don't want to get involved into the details of politics in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's none of our business. But what we want is that, and at the end, it's a compromise which all three constituent peoples can accept. And a compromise means that they are all happy. And in this case here, it's that the Bosniaks and the Croats find a solution. And I deeply regret that we haven't been able to find this compromise yet. I deeply regret it. But I'd like to thank the initiative, especially Angelina Eichhorst from the AS, who did hard work trying to find a solution. Sorry about that, but I was so inspired, especially by you should take the floor here in the European Parliament. Perhaps you can convince my colleagues from the left what the idea of constituent peoples are. You are a constituent people. Sorry. Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David McAllister. Now
oh yeah, I have to go. Sorry, it's 1:30. Do widzenia. Have a nice day, and thank you for coming. Thank you. And God bless your country. Cheers. Bye, David. See you soon in Sarajevo.
Mostar.
In Mostar. Yeah.
Last time we met in Sarajevo.
Yeah, next time in Mostar.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
So we have here Francesco Ronchi, made from also our biggest expert and big helper to find to try to find out how to bring more civil society into discussion on this important issue. And I would like to open the floor still if there are some other questions from the public. On the, no.
Can I just
would like to have some
small clarification? I completely agree with Mr. McAllister. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially within the majority nation, the Bosnian political elite, there is a thesis about almost a panacea, abandoning the principle of constituent people that will resolve absolutely every problem within our state or political system. But abandoning principle of constituent people will not just merge or transform three. I agree with you. So Bosnia and Herzegovina basically during the past had multi-ethnic and multi-confessional structure, but at the moment contemporary Bosnia and Herzegovina is basically multinational state, three completely comprehensive national community, which means three national communities will not just merge into one civic society. Maybe someone can help me within this room. Does any one of you knows just one example in which the state was structured as a civic state without the ground of civic society? Just one example, and I will rest my case. I cannot imagine. I don't know the one example of that sort. And regarding the functionality of our state, basically a lot of international officials, especially diplomats, when they are trying to push that criteria of creating a stable and functional administrative apparatus of our state, do you know any example of functional state, vertical state, in every layer of its administrative structure without functional political system? So that is my basic question. How can we resolve the big problems without or with skipping the fundamental problems that we have in our society? That is my question for all international diplomats when they try to push toward the state functionality argument and put aside these national tensions.
Right. Maybe,
Just very last, first to thank everybody. I think first and foremost, really for bringing all of us together. Second, all of the speakers. I think it's important that we hear your voice, that we hear your concerns, both in terms of what was said of the dangers of not having a deal now, and indeed the different steps and what it can bring. It's like every deal, unless everything is agreed, nothing is agreed, and it means that then you find yourself right at the beginning. And that's why I feel very strongly that the plea that you've made to us, to the EU, as the voice of the younger generation, I hope you're also heard in your own country, in the sense that I also believe that it's a message that has to be heard from all of those who are actually at the table having to make these compromises. Because, and as I said, until nothing is agreed, the country cannot move forward. And we understand that it's such a difficult balance and it's a difficult equilibrium in terms of individual rights, in terms of collective rights, in terms of what is expected from the ECTH, in terms of the Constitutional Court rulings. So finding that very narrow path which is at the heart of all of the compromises that have to be made so that the country together can progress. We will be there, we will continue to work now until the elections, after the elections. I hope that we can also get everything lined up now that we have a budget for the elections, we have the people to do it, but again, we will be there, the EU will be there, we're not giving up.
Well, thank you very much. I think you were as well very moved by the words from our student representative. That's by the way. I had the pleasure to share the dinner yesterday with you, but I didn't know that there is such a potential. So I'm offering you, to come here to do the internship, maybe to do some explaining a bit more, because last night I was explaining to our students when I get impressed by the students, and that's when I see their initiative, and I see their communication skills, and I'm really amazed, if for nothing, to find out that Mostar has a voice and Croats have a voice in Bosnia and Herzegovina, regardless of whatever the outcome will be. So this struggle and this fight for equal rights will continue. I just came from United States of America. They're having their elections coming up, and there's a deeply divided society over there as well. I had the meetings with American Democrats and Republican congressmen, but also with the civil society, and they have discussions, by the way, on the electoral process and on the issues that they're facing, because I just couldn't understand that you can go there and vote without ID. So there are many issues. There are many issues even in United States of America on the electoral process and integrity of the whole process that this society is facing. So I would love Bosnia and Herzegovina to have a European approach, as we have a DEG unit here that are taking care that the third world country have this electoral process in accordance with the standards that as a European Union we do have. So maybe this solution, the final solution for the negotiations between our leaders we should take into account that it's European, because we had the Dayton-Paris peace agreement, and the whole path towards Brussels from Dayton-Paris through the OHR is being financed mainly by European Union funds. As the Office of High Representative, the engineer is very much aware of that we are financing almost half of the budget of the Office of High Representative. He can still impose the law. There are calls in Bosnia and Herzegovina that he imposes the budget without the agreement between the leaders of Bosnia and Herzegovina on the budget. So there are calls that he imposes the law, that he imposes the budget for the elections. So why not impose the electoral law changes? There is always a call for finding the solution, but we must also have a lessons learned exercise here. What happens when we have elections without really necessary changes? So we had in 2001 we have Alliance for Change's government that lasted for 1.5 years. That was a complete blockage in some parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we had this experience with platform government that was also done with meddling of biggest parties, biggest demographic group, and Bosnia and Herzegovina was not advancing anywhere. Today's meeting was organized in order to raise the issue of peace and stability, as this lack of agreement raises the issues of peace and stability. We are having a visit of Charles Michel, President of the Council, very soon. I think it's this week, and this issue should be taken with necessary attention. And I'm really grateful to all of you who came here today to open this discussion, and I wish you all well, especially to the students, to find out a bit more about the European Parliament, about our work here, and about different views on societies and multi-ethnic societies here that we are having in the European Parliament. So we were expecting Madam President, but she will be coming maybe in a few more minutes. If there's any other President of the Parliament is coming just to say hello to us. Yeah, she should be coming any minute, so I'm not keeping you waiting. But if there are any other suggestions for the talk, yeah.
I would like to emphasize that Anna shared the hate speech report.
Yeah.
The time period was October 2021 to April 2022. It was basically in time of the negotiations, so it is a hate speech report, so you can see a clear social atmosphere on the ground. And who is sharing hate speech and inflammatory rhetoric. I think that is very important, just so you can partly feel the social atmosphere in BIH, and there you have everything documented with media reports, video links, etc. So I urge you to take a look at the hate speech report.
Thank you, Martin Nikolic, and thank you all. The most important thing is when we are visiting different countries from European Parliament, we are having suggestions from EU delegation to have a talk with civil society, with the young people. But it's very interesting. Why do we, in certain countries, are just meeting people who live in these capitals, who don't have any touch with the real grassroots civil society? So maybe sometimes we will start this practice of bringing these people here in order to listen to these real people who are living this civil society life, and the students. So it's very, as they say in London, cushy life, not to move from the capital and to have the best friends there. But in a deeply divided societies, it's very important to go on the ground, to visit different parts, and to listen to different stories. So for me, this was the best occasion that we brought people from Mostar. Next time it will be Banja Luka as well. Maybe they have something else to say. And from Sarajevo, so to bring these societies to here and to offer this civil society also the prospect. I'm really, I'm sorry that I don't have all these colleagues who are always demanding the civil society approach to electoral law here in the room, but you know, sometimes talk is just a talk. It's not a real desire, but anyway.
They were informed about this this gathering, but they didn't come.
Yeah.
If I can add maybe on the point of civil society, certainly the instructions that we give to our delegations is that they should go obviously outside of the capital. In some countries, including in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have also branches outside of the, throughout the territory. Our colleagues have projects everywhere, so you should be also seeing them. They will try and organize also town hall meetings, as they did in Mostar. We had that also at the time of the agreement on the elections for Mostar. We also have, through the European Visitors Program, a number of occasions for civil society and people to come here. It's also co-organized by the European Parliament, and so we've had a number of people like this coming. So if there's any of the candidates who want to also contact our delegation and express interest, for example, in the EU Visitors Program, it's an occasion to come and see the institutions from the inside over a week, 2-week period, something like that. So again, there's a lot of different possibilities, financial possibilities as well, to come and intern and participate in some of the EU activities. So both in country, contact the EU delegation, it's your delegation as well, it's there for you, not just for people in Sarajevo, but for everybody, and they really try, but also contact the programs, and they can put you in touch with the organizers for exchange programs with institutions in Brussels.
I think it would be very good to have a representative of civil society and universities from all of these cities, Mostar, Sarajevo and Banja Luka. It would be especially precious for people from European institutions to see the deepness of the divisions, because I suppose from other countries, representatives of civil society are not so much involved in the politics and political cleavages. Some of them, yes, maybe in
I was also
issues.
posted in Lebanon, so I
Yeah,
have a little idea of
that's
where the
exactly.
divisions
Well,
can come
maybe
from.
people who know the situation in Lebanon would not be surprised, but it could be very, very informative for people from European, both Parliament and all executive institutions, to see the divisions of the deepness of the divisions, and to realize that the dispute is not purely political.
Agreed, but I think also, if I can make a plea, that what is also of interest to us is what can actually be done together, what can help overcome these divisions, what it is that there is, what is the agenda that actually brings people together. And I think the answer that we've had so far is the EU agenda. This is what actually brings everybody together in terms of what can be the reforms that we agree, what are the concrete steps that can be done, David was mentioning a number, for example, of anti-corruption laws. I mean, I think it's really difficult for us to understand why these fail in Parliament. We understand why, there's a lot of politics around it, but I think in terms of explaining to the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina why these laws cannot be adopted, I think is very, very difficult. If you claim to be pro-EU, to take the country to the EU, these anti-corruption laws have to be adopted. They are part of the 14 key priorities. They are what will make your country stronger in terms of rule of law. So I think it's also going, you know, it's good to understand the divisions and then see what we can do to overcome these divisions. I still believe it can be done. It's going to be step by step, but it can be done. That's where we're here to help.
Maybe I sound too pessimistic when I said that that process started too late in middle 2021. But our colleague reminded me on Mostar agreement that we solved the, let's say, Mostar crisis not in late 2020, but in February, March, when the mayor was elected. February, March 2021, which means that the delay of the new phase is not so long, but we have so many unsolved issues.
And most elections were postponed as well, unlike the other elections in the town. So when this was possible with Mostar, to be exceptionally taken out of this local elections rule and to have special elections organized around the Christmas, which is quite unusual.
20th of December.
Yeah. So there is a possibility for creative approach, and I'm really hoping that Mr. Charles Michel is coming with a creative approach. Everything is possible if there is a will. So we are looking forward to his arrival, as all three parties to this issue are expecting creative approach from the part of the highest level at this time. I mean, we have this balance of powers between President of the Commission and President of the Council, but sometimes maybe they will, and the President of the Parliament, but we are just, we don't have such executive power. We are the ones who are criticizing after everything fails.
Željana, if I can just add one more thing. So when we speak about European agenda, which is supposed to be welcomed by everybody, so what Mr. Babic said, there is a strong influence of people who don't have this, agenda in their focus. So it means that we cannot ignore the time. We cannot ignore that time is passing by, and then some other will use. For example, I'm very worried about this, what we have read in media in Sarajevo about the declaration of resolution of German Bundestag, which could occur in next few days, which would condemn this legitimate representation of constitutive people. So it means that when people used to have Komšić as a so-called representative of Croatian, they will go further and further in this agenda. So we cannot just wait and think that they will come to our European agenda. So we have to really be active in this and trying to. I think that you said you said that it would be a good proposal to increase the speed of Bosnia and Herzegovina to become a candidate, because if we are too slow with our processes here in European Union, then the other process will speed up. So it means that, and maybe the other side is so they hold the situation with corruption, and corruption is connected with this really very high numbers of governments and ministries and everything, and that's all connected with this stopping, European path and maybe promoting some other paths, So also solving the corruption problems in Bosnia and Herzegovina is connected with European path. So it's not that we just have to wait, that they solve corruption problems. If we make this just relation among nations, then that will help speeding up the European process. So it is connected in both directions that I want to underline.
Right. I would like to thank you very much. We will not keep you waiting here. I think this was very because it's always good to know when to stop, and when to not start repeating ourselves. Thank you for all the attentions and that you paid to this burning issue, and it will be a burning issue. So maybe one of the solutions that we can come out with one of the conclusions is for External Action Service to pay attention to possible and expected frauds that will be happening after the elections.
Indirect elections.
Indirect elections for the House of People members, because we have some of the Bosniak parties calling for this, openly calling for this, and one of the members of think tanks and civil societies that are calling on this focus attention to elect to Croats, even members of the House of People, in order to make this federal government that will result in in the deeper crisis. So not only the member of the presidency will be certainly elected by the Bosniak votes, but then if we have this issue with House of People, then the whole absurdity of the electoral process that you all called for will create a deep social crisis, as we said, and also to take care of the EU citizens. Croatia has given 1,100,000 EU citizenship during the war and after the war, so not only Croats are EU citizens, but many of them are working even in the institutions here. They're Bosniak Serbs, and they can explain you that vividly. What it means to be Croatian citizens as well, in words and deeds. For Croatia is a peace and security issue. We want to preserve this multi-ethnic country. We want to preserve power sharing and way of governing, and also we want to preserve peace and stability, and we want to move forward. So thank you so much. Hopefully we'll be continuing this discussion in Mostar, so in a time to come. Thank you.